Evan Lockwood had worked in this small repair shop for almost 10 years. And in all those years, he had never seen anyone like Lyra, the quiet alien woman who joined his team 3 months ago. She never talked much, never argued, and never asked for anything. She simply came in, worked her hours, and stayed in her own world. But recently, Evan noticed something that made him uneasy. Lyra was staying longer and longer every night. Long after everyone else went home, she worked as if the shop belonged to her, wiping shelves, cleaning counters, sorting tools, and sweeping the floor until her arms shook from exhaustion. Every evening, Evan pretended not to see it. But the truth was clear. Lyra was tired in a way he had never seen before. Her shoulders drooped, her steps were slow, and her eyes always looked red. It was the kind of tired that came from more than just hard work. It came from fear, stress, and something deeper. Something she was hiding. One night, around closing time, Evan watched as the other workers packed up and left. The shop grew quiet, the sky outside turning dark as the city lights flickered on. Lyra stayed behind as always, wiping the large tool table with slow shaking hands. Evan walked to the door and locked it, but instead of leaving, he stepped into the back storage room and kept the lights off. He wanted to understand why she worked like this. From his hiding place, he watched Lyra through the small gap between the shelves. She thought she was alone. She picked up heavy boxes, arranged metal pieces on the shelves, and cleaned the floor again and again, even though it was already spotless. Every movement looked painful. Yet she forced herself to keep going. At one point, she stopped working and placed both hands on the counter to support herself. Her breathing became uneven. Her body trembled. Evan leaned forward in worry, afraid she might collapse. But after a moment, she straightened, wiped her forehead, and whispered something in her alien language. The shop was silent, so Evan heard her clearly, even from far away. Time. No time, no more time, she whispered, her voice breaking. Evan frowned. He didn't know what she meant, but those words didn't sound like they belonged to a normal worker. This wasn't someone staying late to impress her boss. This was someone running out of time for something very serious. Lyra slowly walked to the drawer where they kept small tool parts, opened it, and pulled out a tiny metal ring. She stared at it with sad eyes. Then she did something that shocked Evan. She slipped the ring into her pocket. It wasn't worth much, maybe 10 credits. But stealing was stealing. Why would she take something so small and cheap? Why risk her job? Evan wanted to step out and confront her, but something inside him stopped him. The look in her eyes wasn't the look of a thief. It was the look of someone desperate, someone fighting a silent battle alone. When she finally finished, Lyra turned off the lights, grabbed her worn-out jacket, and walked out the back door. Evan quickly followed but kept a distance. He didn't want her to know he was watching. Something told him she would run if she found out. Outside, the night was cold. Lyra wrapped her jacket tightly around herself and hurried down the narrow street. Evan noticed she avoided the main road and instead walked through dark alleys where no one else went at this hour. She kept looking over her shoulder, her steps quick and nervous. Evan followed silently, his heartbeat loud in his ears. The more he watched, the more questions filled his mind. Why was she stealing small items? Why was she pushing herself until she almost collapsed? Why was she walking through dangerous streets as if she had no other choice? The deeper they went, the darker the alleys became. Old buildings, broken windows, scattered trash, and empty silence surrounded them. Lyra moved like someone who had walked this path many times, someone who had no other home to return to. Evan slowed down when she suddenly stopped in front of a half-destroyed building at the end of the street. She looked around carefully, making sure no one followed. Evan hid behind a wall, watching her closely. Lyra slipped inside through a broken door. Disappearing into the darkness, Evan stood still, his breath frozen in his chest, Whatever she was hiding was inside that building. And he knew he was about to discover a truth he never expected. Something that would change everything between them. Something that would explain why the woman who never rested was fighting so hard to survive. He took a quiet step forward, ready to follow her inside, his heart pounding, unaware that his life was about to change forever. Evan stayed outside the broken building for a moment, listening to the silence around him. The night air felt heavy, and somewhere far away a siren echoed through the city. But here, in this forgotten corner, everything was quiet. He could feel his heartbeat inside his chest as he stepped closer to the doorway where Lyra had disappeared. He had followed her this far, and now he wanted to know the truth. He wanted to understand why a woman so soft-spoken, so hard-working, and so desperate was living inside a place like this. But before he entered, he heard a faint noise behind him. A soft shift of footsteps on gravel. He quickly hid behind the wall and waited. A shadow passed by slowly. It wasn't Lyra. It was someone else, someone large. Someone whose footsteps carried weight. They paused near the door, as if checking the area. Evan watched carefully, holding his breath. The figure looked around for several seconds, and then walked away into the darkness. Evan felt a chill. Whoever that person was, he wasn't friendly, and he wasn't a neighbor out for a walk. It made Evan even more sure that Lyra was hiding something dangerous, something she didn't want anyone to see. After a moment, Evan slipped inside the building, careful not to make a sound. The air inside was cold and dusty. The hallway was narrow and filled with broken furniture, old crates and hanging wires. The whole building looked abandoned years ago. Only the faint glow of a tiny lamp deeper inside suggested someone lived here. He followed the light, his steps slow and quiet. He could hear a soft voice ahead, Lyra's voice. It wasn't the calm voice he knew from the shop. This one was full of worry, full of fear, and something else he couldn't understand at first. Then he heard another sound, a small, weak cough. Evan felt his chest tighten as he reached the doorway and looked inside the room. There, on a thin blanket, lay a small alien child. No older than 5, her skin was pale, her breathing fast and uneven. She looked sick, too sick to move. Lyra knelt beside her, carefully touching the child's forehead. Her face looked different, now full of emotion she never showed at work. Suddenly everything made sense to Evan, the double shifts, the shaking hands, the long hours, the stealing of small items. She wasn't saving money for herself. She wasn't eating enough because she was feeding someone else. She wasn't avoiding people because she wanted to be alone. She was protecting this child. He felt guilt rise inside him. He had followed her thinking she was doing something wrong, but she was only surviving, trying to keep her child alive inside a forgotten corner of the city. Lyra pulled out the small metal ring she stole and placed it beside the child. Whispering in her language, Evan didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. She was apologizing. Maybe for not being able to give more, maybe for failing to find better medication, maybe for the life they were forced to live. The child coughed again, harder this time. Lyra panicked and grabbed a small bottle of cheap medicine. She shook it, but only one drop came out. She looked at the bottle with fear in her eyes. "No. No more," she whispered in English this time. Her voice breaking, Evan felt pain in his chest. He wanted to step forward, offer help, say something, anything, but he stopped himself. He didn't want to scare her. He needed to understand more before he revealed he was here. Lyra lifted the child into her arms, humming a soft tune. The child slowly relaxed against her chest, her breathing still weak but calmer. Lyra's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Evan leaned against the wall silently, watching the moment. He never imagined that the woman sweeping his shop every night was fighting a battle this heavy. He never imagined she was doing everything alone, with no family, no help, and no safety. For a moment, he considered leaving quietly, pretending he never followed her. But then he remembered the man he saw outside. The heavy footsteps, the shadow that checked the door. Someone else knew about this place. Someone dangerous, someone watching her. Evan clenched his fists. If that man returned, Lyra and the child would be in danger, real danger. This wasn't just about poverty or sickness anymore. This was something darker. As he turned to leave, planning to return in the morning to help her in a safe way, he accidentally stepped on a broken piece of glass. It cracked loudly under his shoe. Lyra froze. Her head turned sharply toward the doorway. Her eyes wide with fear, she stood up quickly. Shielding the child. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Evan knew he couldn't hide anymore. He slowly stepped into the light, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "It's me," he said softly. "Evan. I didn't want to scare you." Lyra's eyes filled with shock, confusion, and fear all at once. Her whole body stiffened. What are you doing here?" she whispered, holding the child closer. Evan took a gentle breath. He had no idea how deep her secrets went. But he knew one thing clearly now. He wasn't going to walk away from her anymore. He couldn't, not after seeing the truth she was forced to hide every day. Lyra stared at Evan like she was seeing a ghost. Her breath shook, and her arms tightened protectively around the sick child. It was the first time Evan had ever seen fear on her face, not the quiet, hidden fear she carried at work, but open, raw fear that made her look smaller than she was. Evan raised his hand slowly, showing he had no weapon. No threat, only concern. He didn't move closer. He kept a respectful distance. The last thing he wanted was to make her think he came to expose her or harm her child. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't want to frighten you. I only wanted to make sure you were safe." Lyra swallowed hard, her glowing eyes reflecting the dim light of the tiny lamp beside her. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept properly in weeks. Maybe months. Her clothes were worn out, her hair messy, and her hands shaking as she held the little girl. "You followed me," she whispered. Not accusing, not angry, just tired. "Yes," Evan admitted. "I didn't understand why you stayed late every night. I thought you were hurt. Or in trouble." He glanced gently at the small child. "I didn't know." The child coughed again, a weak dry sound that made Lyra pull her closer. Evan saw now Lyra wasn't staying back because she wanted extra money or because she was dedicated to the job. She was doing it because she had no choice. Because the little girl in her arms depended on her, depended on every small credit she earned, every stolen part she could sell for medicine. Lyra sat down slowly on the floor, keeping the child against her chest. She didn't tell Evan to leave, but she didn't tell him to come closer either. She simply looked at him with tired eyes, like she didn't have the energy to hide anymore. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "If they find out you saw this, they will hurt you too." Evan's eyebrows pulled together. "Who?" Lyra looked toward the doorway, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Her voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "The collectors." Evan felt a cold shock run down his spine. He knew about collectors, people who hunted unpaid debts across the galaxy. They were known for being ruthless, violent, and heartless. If Lyra was hiding from them, it meant her situation was far more dangerous than he imagined. "They came for me once," Lyra said, her voice breaking. "But I ran. I ran with her." She softly stroked the child's hair. "My daughter, Riva." Evan felt something tighten inside his chest. Riva, the little girl, pale and shaking, too weak even to lift her head. "She is sick," Lyra continued. "Her lungs. They collapse when the planet is too cold. The medicine is expensive. The doctors will not see us without payment." Tears filled her eyes. "I work double shifts, triple shifts, anything I can. But it is never enough." Evan stepped a little closer but slowly, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. She just watched him with lost eyes. "Why didn't you ask for help?" he asked softly. I would have. No, Lyra cut him off. Shaking her head. People talk, people judge. People betray. I cannot trust anyone. I cannot lose her. Evan understood now why she hid everything so carefully, why she avoided the main roads. Why she worked like a machine until her body shook. She wasn't just surviving. She was fighting for her child's life every single day, alone. Riva made a soft sound. Half cough, half cry, and Lyra panicked again. She pulled out a tiny cloth and wiped the child's mouth, whispering comforting words in her alien language. The sound was gentle and heartbreaking. Evan knelt slowly, keeping his hands visible. May I look? I know a bit about medicine. Lyra hesitated, every fear she carried rising back to her eyes. But when Riva coughed again, her small body shaking, Lyra finally nodded. Evan moved closer and gently touched the child's forehead. It was burning hot, her skin clammy. Her breathing too fast. She needed real medical help. Not cheap street medicine, not stolen parts sold for a few credits. She's worse than you think, Evan said softly. She needs help soon. Lyra closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. I know, she whispered. But I have no money left, and the collectors. They will come again. Evan looked around the room, the cracked walls, the thin blanket, the cheap lamp, the small pile of stolen metal scraps. This wasn't a home. This was a temporary shelter for someone who had run out of choices. There has to be a way, Evan said, his voice firm now. You can't keep living like this. You can't do this alone. Lyra looked at him, truly looked. Maybe for the first time since she began working at his shop, she searched his face, trying to understand why a human who barely knew her would care so much. Why are you helping me? She whispered, confusion mixing with fear. Evan took a slow breath. Because you deserve help. Because your daughter deserves safety. Because no one should fight alone. For the first time. Lyra's expression softened, just a little. But before she could speak, a loud thud echoed from outside the building. The sound of heavy footsteps approaching. Lyra's eyes widened in terror. They're here, she whispered, her voice shaking, holding Riva tightly as the footsteps grew louder and closer. And Evan realized the danger he had walked into was far more real than he imagined. The footsteps outside grew heavier, slow but confident, like someone who already knew no one inside could resist them. Lyra froze, her eyes wide in fear, and even little Riva sensed the danger. She curled closer into her mother's chest. Whimpering softly, Evan felt the air turn colder. Not because of the weather, but because of the presence approaching the broken doorway. Lyra grabbed the small lamp and blew it out. The room fell into deep darkness. Only the faint moonlight from a cracked window gave shape to their silhouettes. She pulled Riva under her cloak and motioned for Evan to move back. Her hands shook, not from exhaustion this time, but from pure terror. Don't speak, she whispered, barely a breath. Don't move. Evan pressed himself against the wall, every muscle tight. He didn't fully understand the collectors. But he knew one thing, if Lyra was this afraid. These men were not the kind who simply knocked and asked questions. They were the kind who took what they wanted, no matter who stood in their way. The footsteps stopped right outside the building. A heavy hand pushed the broken door, and it creaked loudly. The sound echoed like thunder in the empty halls. Evan held his breath as the silhouette of a tall figure entered. The shadow filled the entire doorway, wide shoulders, thick boots, and a long coat that brushed the floor. Lyra. A low voice called, smooth and cruel. I know you're here. Lyra's body trembled so badly, Evan feared she might collapse. Riva whimpered again, and Lyra quickly covered her tiny mouth, tears silently falling down her cheeks. I told you, the voice continued. Running only makes things worse. The man stepped farther inside, his heavy boots crunching broken glass with every step. Evan slowly crouched, searching the floor for something he could use: a pipe, a brick, anything, but he found nothing useful. Just dust and broken wood. He felt helpless watching Lyra stare at the doorway like it was a nightmare she had lived many times before. The man sniffed the air slightly, like a predator sensing its prey. "Your debt grows every day," he said softly. "Interest is not kind to runaways." Lyra squeezed her eyes shut, her voice barely a whisper. "Please." "Not now. She is sick." The man chuckled, a slow, cold laugh that made Evan's stomach twist. "Sick?" he said. "Good, weakness makes things easier." Evan felt anger rise inside him like fire. But he forced himself to stay silent. The collector didn't know he was here yet. And Evan needed to use that advantage. If there was one at all. The man stepped closer, reaching the entrance of the small room where they hid. Evan could now see his outline more clearly. His coat had strange symbols, and a metal weapon hung from his belt. "Come out, Lyra," he said. "Don't make me take the child first," Lyra gasped softly. Pressing Riva tighter, Evan finally understood the truth. The collectors didn't want money. Or not only money, they wanted leverage. They wanted Lyra's daughter. They wanted to take her to force payment or worse, sell her for profit. Evan saw Lyra shake violently, her whole body breaking under fear and helplessness. For months she fought alone, and now the threat had arrived at her door again. The collector took one more step, then paused. His head tilted slightly, like he sensed another presence. Evan's breath almost stopped. "There's someone else here," the man said softly. Evan knew hiding was no longer an option. He moved forward before the collector could step inside the room, placing himself between the man and Lyra's hiding place. The man's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, cold, calculating, amused. "And who?" he asked in a low, threatening voice. "Are you?" Evan straightened, fear twisting inside him. But he refused to back away. "A friend," he said. "And I think you should leave." The collector smiled slowly, showing sharp metallic teeth, an alien augmentation meant to intimidate. "Human," he said mockingly. "You have no idea what you're stepping into." Evan kept his voice steady. "Maybe not. But I'm not letting you take her child." The collector took one step closer, towering over Evan. "Move aside," he ordered. "She belongs to us." Evan felt his heart hammering. But he didn't step back. If he did, Lyra and Riva were finished. He stood firm, his jaw tight. The collector leaned in, his cold breath brushing Evan's face. "You think you can protect her?" Evan didn't answer with words. He grabbed the nearest piece of metal, a broken pipe, and swung it as hard as he could. The strike hit the collector's arm, barely making him flinch. But it was enough to push the man back 2 steps. The collector growled, anger replacing amusement. "Wrong choice." "Human." He reached for his weapon, a long electrified baton. Sparks lighting the dark room. Evan braced himself, knowing he couldn't win a fight like this, but also knowing he couldn't let them get to Lyra. Suddenly, Lyra stepped forward, her eyes fierce despite her trembling hands. She held something small, a hidden knife she must have kept for last resort protection. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice breaking but brave. "You will not touch my child." The collector laughed, raising his weapon. "Then you will both pay." But something unexpected happened. A second pair of footsteps echoed in the hallway, fast and heavy. Another collector? Another threat? Evan didn't know yet, but he knew one thing. The night was far from over, and the real danger had only just begun. The night air outside the broken building felt colder than usual, sharp enough to sting the lungs. But Lyra barely noticed it. Her entire focus was on Riva, who lay weakly in her arms, breathing shallow and fast. Evan stayed close behind her, checking every shadow, every corner, expecting the collectors to appear again at any second. He knew they weren't safe, not yet. The 2 collectors they escaped from were strong, persistent, and angry. And men like them did not give up easily. Lyra could barely walk, her legs trembling from fear and exhaustion. But she pushed herself, whispering to Riva, trying to keep the child awake. "Just a little more," she murmured softly. "Stay with me. My little star." Evan kept his voice low as he walked beside her. "There's an old supply shed around the corner. No one uses it anymore. We can hide there for a moment." Lyra nodded weakly, trusting him completely now. Something she never expected she could do with anyone again. They reached the shed, which was half buried behind overgrown weeds and rusted metal sheets. Evan pushed the door open. It groaned loudly, but inside it was dry, empty, and more importantly, hidden from the main street. He guided Lyra inside and closed the door quietly behind them. For a moment, the world outside went completely silent. Leaving only the soft sound of Riva's strained breathing, Lyra held her daughter close, rocking her gently, fighting back her tears. Evan crouched beside them, watching with worry carved deep into his face. "We need to get her to a doctor," he whispered. "She can't last much longer like this." Lyra swallowed hard. "We can't. The collectors will search hospitals first. They know she is sick." Evan clenched his jaw, frustrated. "Then we'll find another way." But before he could think of a plan, a sound cut through the night, a distant thud. Then another, slow and deliberate, like heavy boots stepping across gravel. Lyra's head snapped up, her eyes widening. "No. No, they found us," she whispered in terror. Evan pressed a finger to his lips. Signaling her to stay quiet, he moved to the window. Barely lifting the rusty flap, his heart froze. Two shadows moved across the alley. Tall and unmistakably familiar, the collectors. They were searching methodically, checking every doorway, every alley, every corner. And they were getting closer. Evan's mind raced. He could fight one collector with luck, maybe two with clever tricks, but like this, injured, exhausted. With Lyra and Riva to protect, it felt impossible. Yet running wasn't an option. Not while the collectors blocked the only exit, inside the shed. Lyra gently pressed her forehead against Riva's, whispering softly to keep her calm. Her hands shook violently, her body trembling with fear. Evan quietly approached her, kneeling beside her. "They haven't seen us yet," he whispered. "There's a way out." "But it's risky." Lyra looked at him with desperate eyes. "Whatever it is, we'll do it." Evan pointed toward the back wall of the shed. "There's a loose panel behind the tool rack. It leads into the drainage tunnel. It's tight, dirty, but it comes out on the other side of the district." Lyra nodded quickly. "Show me." But before they could move, the footsteps outside suddenly sped up, and a harsh voice shouted, "Check the sheds." Lyra gasped, pressing Riva close. "They're coming." Evan's eyes went sharp and focused. "Go to the back wall." Now, Lyra rushed to the wall, Riva clinging to her. Evan grabbed the metal bar from the shelf and jammed it through the door handles. Forming a makeshift lock, the collectors reached the front of the shed just as he stepped back. A heavy fist slammed against the door, rattling it violently. "Open up." Lyra flinched, covering Riva's ears. Evan steadied himself, gripping a metal wrench and positioning himself in front of the entrance. Another boom echoed as the collector kicked the door again. This time harder, the wood cracking. Evan's breath came fast and shallow. He knew the door wouldn't hold for long. "Evan," Lyra whispered urgently, "the panel is stuck." He spun around, grabbed the wrench, and ran to her, prying the metal panel with all his strength. The collector kicked again. Another crack, one more hit would break the door completely. The panel finally popped open with a loud snap, revealing a narrow, dark tunnel, barely large enough for Lyra to crawl through while holding Riva. "Go," Evan urged. "I'll stall them." Lyra's eyes filled with horror. "No, you come too." "I will," he said, though he wasn't sure it was true. "Just go first." She hesitated only for a heartbeat before crawling into the tunnel. Holding Riva tightly, Evan watched until their shadows disappeared into the darkness. Then the door finally burst open, splintering into pieces. The collectors stepped inside, weapons ready. Evan stood alone in the center of the shed, gripping the wrench like a blade. Sweat dripping from his forehead, but his eyes fierce, unbroken. "You just don't stop, do you?" The first collector growled. Evan didn't back down. "Neither do I," the collectors charged at him. And Evan braced himself, ready to fight with everything he had left, even if it meant giving up his life. Because Lyra and Riva were out there, crawling toward safety. And the night everything went wrong was also the night he decided he would not let them fall. Not ever again. Evan never thought a moment could feel so long. But standing in that dim, broken room with two collectors closing in, it felt like time stretched thin around him. Every instinct in his body screamed for him to run, hide, or find safety. But the sight of Lyra clutching Riva behind him changed everything. He could not move backward. He could not let them pass. The first collector wiped the blood from his lip where Evan's earlier attack had hit him. His eyes glowed faintly with anger. "You made a mistake," he growled, stepping forward. "Humans should stay out of alien business." The second collector flanked him, gripping his shock net tighter. "Take the woman," he said coldly. "Take the kid first if she resists." Lyra sucked in a terrified breath and pulled Riva even closer. Riva coughed weakly, her tiny hand gripping her mother's shirt. Evan felt a painful twist in his chest. The child didn't even understand what danger meant. Only that she was scared. Evan scanned the room quickly, looking for anything he could use. He was a mechanic. He wasn't strong or trained to fight. But he knew tools. He knew pressure points. He knew how to improvise under stress. His eyes locked onto the metal toolbox he had brought earlier for storage repairs. It was half open, tools scattered across the dusty floor. Before the collectors moved again, Evan kicked the toolbox toward them. The lid snapped open fully. Tools flying out across the ground. Metal clattered loudly and slid under their feet. Both collectors paused, startled. It wasn't enough to stop them, but it made them hesitate, and hesitation was all he needed. Evan grabbed a heavy wrench and spun it in his hand. He didn't say a word. He didn't threaten. He simply stood ready. The first collector smirked. "You think that toy will save you?" Evan didn't answer. Instead, he stepped to the left, making the collectors guess which direction he'd go. He wasn't trying to fight like a soldier. He was trying to think like a mechanic. Someone who solved problems with angle, leverage, and timing. The second collector fired the shock net, and Evan jumped sideways just in time. The net struck the wall, sparks flying, and the collector cursed as he struggled to reload. Evan seized the moment. Rushing toward the first collector with the wrench raised, the man swung his electrified baton. But Evan ducked and slammed the wrench into the man's rib. Not with strength, but with perfect placement. He hit a seam between the armor plates, a weak point. The man shouted in pain and stumbled sideways, smashing into the wall. "Move," Evan shouted to Lyra. "Go out the back." Lyra hesitated for only half a second before running toward the fire exit with Riva in her arms. Her heart racing, the second collector lunged at Evan, grabbing his arm and slamming him into the floor. Evan gasped as pain shot up his spine, but he refused to let go of the wrench. The collector leaned closer, snarling. "You should have stayed out of this." Evan gripped a loose wire on the ground, one still connected to the old building's power line, and slammed it against the metal piece on the collector's armor. Electricity surged through the man's suit, sparks exploding across his chest. He let out a roar and staggered backward. Shaking violently, Evan rolled away, coughing from the dust. His arms trembled, but he pushed himself back onto his feet. He couldn't stop now. He needed to buy more time. The first collector finally recovered. Fury twisting his face, he charged with pure rage. Swinging his baton in deadly arcs, Evan dodged one strike, then another. But the third hit his shoulder. Electricity ripping through his nerves, he cried out. Almost falling, but he forced himself to stay upright. Lyra reached the back door and turned, her eyes wide with panic. "Evan, come!" She screamed, but Evan knew he couldn't run yet. If he turned his back, the collectors would chase her. They would catch her, they would take Riva, they would win. And he couldn't let that happen, not after everything he saw. Not after everything she had been through. So he did something that surprised even himself. He charged forward, slamming into the first collector with all his weight, knocking both of them to the ground. The baton rolled away, its sparks dying out. The second collector reached for his net gun again. But Evan grabbed a long metal rod from the floor and struck the weapon. Bending it out of shape, the man growled and lunged. But Evan kicked him square in the knee, sending him crashing down. The first collector grabbed Evan's collar, pulling him close. "You think you're a hero?" He spat. Evan gritted his teeth. "No," he whispered. "Just someone who won't let you hurt them." With a final burst of strength, Evan slammed the metal rod against the power junction box on the wall. Sparks exploded everywhere, a wave of electricity pulsing across the metal floor. Both collectors screamed as the shock hit them, armor systems short-circuiting. Bodies jerking violently before they collapsed unconscious. Smoke filled the room as the lights flickered weakly. Evan dropped the rod, stumbling, his chest heaved. Sweat dripping down his face. His body burned with pain, but he didn't care. He turned toward the exit, where Lyra stood trembling in shock, Riva clinging to her neck. She breathed one word soft, full of emotion. Full of disbelief, "Evan." And he walked toward her, exhausted, broken, but alive. Because he had won a battle no mechanic should survive. And he had done it for them. Evan could barely feel his legs as he staggered through the smoke-filled hallway. His vision blurred, every muscle shaking from the electric shocks he had taken. But he pushed forward because he saw Lyra standing near the exit, holding Riva tightly, her eyes wide with fear and hope fighting inside them. When Evan finally reached her, he leaned his hand against the wall to stay upright. Sweat rolled down his face, and he struggled to catch his breath. Lyra moved quickly, placing her hand on his arm. Her voice trembling. "You shouldn't have stayed. You could have died." Evan gave a weak smile. "Then I'm glad I didn't." Riva lifted her head slowly from Lyra's shoulder. Her small face pale but calm, her eyes blinked at Evan. And she reached out her tiny hand. Evan gently touched her fingers, feeling something warm inside him, something he didn't expect, a sense of belonging. They didn't stay near the building. Sirens were getting louder. And the collectors would wake again sooner or later. Lyra pulled Evan forward, helping him walk into the cold night air. The stars above the ruined streets flickered like distant lanterns. Guiding them away from danger, they moved slowly through narrow side roads. Lyra supporting Evan more than he supported himself. Riva pressed between them for warmth. The city felt huge, dark, and full of secrets at that hour. And Lyra kept glancing behind them, afraid the collectors might chase them again. But for once, no shadows followed, no heavy footsteps echoed behind them. No cold voices whispered her name, for the first time in months. Lyra felt like the night wasn't hunting her. When they reached an old pedestrian bridge, Evan finally collapsed onto a bench. The trembling in his arms wouldn't stop, and his shoulder visibly shook from the earlier hit. Lyra knelt in front of him, checking his injuries. "You are hurt everywhere," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why would you do all this for us?" Evan looked at her gently. "Because you deserve a chance." "Because she deserves a chance." He nodded toward Riva, who sat beside him and held his sleeve. "And because you shouldn't face monsters alone." Lyra lowered her head, tears falling quietly onto the concrete floor. She wiped them fast, almost ashamed of them. "I don't know how to thank you." "Evan," she whispered, no one has helped us like this. Ever. He placed a shaky hand over hers. Then don't thank me. Just let me stay in your life. She lifted her eyes, stunned. As if she never expected someone to say such words to her. For a long moment, they simply sat there under the soft glow of the city lights. Lyra holding his hand, Riva leaning against his side. But reality returned quickly. Lyra had no home now, no safety, no money, and no idea how long they could hide from the collectors. Evan could barely stand on his own feet, but he still said the words that changed everything. You and Riva can stay with me, he whispered. I'll protect you both. I'll make sure you're safe. Lyra shook her head at first, frightened of accepting kindness she didn't think she deserved. I will bring trouble to you, she warned softly. Collectors. They don't forget. Evan leaned back slightly, exhausted but certain. Then they'll have to deal with me, he said. And I'm not afraid anymore. The truth in his voice made her breath catch. Riva tugged on Lyra's sleeve and pointed at Evan, then whispered a small word in her language. A word Lyra had been too afraid to translate until now. Lyra hesitated, then spoke softly. She calls you. Father. Evan's eyes widened, his chest tightening in a way he couldn't explain. Riva reached out to him with both her arms, wanting to be held. Lyra gently placed the child into Evan's lap, and Riva rested her head against his chest. Trusting him completely, Evan held her carefully, feeling warmth spread through him. If she wants me to be that, he said softly, I'll be that. And more. Lyra covered her mouth as tears finally spilled freely. Not of fear this time, but of relief and hope she had forgotten existed. She sat beside him, resting her head against his shoulder. Riva curled between them like she belonged nowhere else. The night felt different now. Safer, gentler, and full of possibilities. They walked to Evan's small apartment at dawn, the sky turning pink above the quiet city. Evan unlocked the door and stepped aside, letting Lyra and Riva enter first, for the first time in a long time. Lyra walked into a place that felt like a home, not a hiding place. Not a broken shelter, not a temporary room, but a home built on trust, safety, and unexpected love. Riva reached out her little hand and placed it in Evan's palm, sealing something unspoken between them. Evan smiled softly, whispering, You're safe now. Lyra stood beside him, her voice trembling with emotion. We are safe. Because of you. And as the morning light filled the room, it became clear. They were no longer three strangers running from danger. They were a family, fragile but real. A family built from courage, kindness, and the moment a mechanic decided to fight like a hero to protect two lives that needed him more than he ever knew.